Blazor Development Services, Server versus WebAssembly, Use Cases, and Costs. So, Blazor Development Services. It's something a lot of people ask about, and today we're going to walk through it step by step. Let's talk about moving on to what is Blazor and why are enterprises choosing it. Blazor is Microsoft's open-source framework for building interactive web UIs using C# and .NET instead of JavaScript. It shares models, validation logic, and business rules between the client and server without requiring separate codebases. For teams already invested in the Microsoft stack, this single-language approach cuts the context switching that slows down mixed C#/TypeScript projects. According to Microsoft's Blazor documentation, Blazor supports 3 hosting models: server, WebAssembly, and auto, each with distinct trade-offs on latency, security, and deployment complexity. The decision between them is less technical than most teams expect, and it comes down to where your users are, how sensitive your data is, and how your team is staffed. Blazor Server renders UI on the server and pushes DOM updates to the browser over a persistent SignalR connection. C# code and data access logic never leave the server, which keeps sensitive business logic behind your firewall. The initial page load is fast because the browser receives standard HTML with a small JavaScript shim rather than a large application bundle. The trade-off: every user interaction requires a server round trip, so server capacity scales linearly with active concurrent users. For internal tools with controlled user counts, this is rarely a problem. For public-facing apps with thousands of simultaneous users, it is. Blazor WebAssembly runs C# directly in the browser via WebAssembly, as defined by the WebAssembly standard maintained by the W3C. After a first load download of roughly 3 to 6 megabytes for a typical enterprise application, the app runs entirely client-side with no server dependency for UI rendering. This makes Blazor WASM well-suited for offline-capable tools, data-intensive dashboards that need sub-100 ms response times, and scenarios where you want to minimize per-user server infrastructure costs. Blazor Server renders UI on the server with SignalR. Blazor WASM runs C# directly in the browser via WebAssembly. Knowing this distinction upfront prevents costly architecture changes mid-project. Now, Blazor Server versus Blazor WebAssembly, key differences. The hosting model choice affects more than performance. It shapes your security posture, infrastructure costs, and the architecture of every data access call in your application. Teams that treat this as a minor configuration decision often find themselves doing significant rework at the 6-month mark. For internal enterprise tools where users are on a corporate LAN or VPN, Blazor Server's round trips typically measure 10 to 30 milliseconds and feel imperceptible. For public-facing applications with users across different geographies, accumulated latency becomes noticeable on interaction-heavy screens. Blazor WASM eliminates that round trip for UI interactions but requires a larger initial download. In practice, for most enterprise internal tools, the difference in perceived performance between the two models is smaller than teams expect before building a prototype. Blazor Server keeps all business logic, connection strings, and data access code on the server. Nothing sensitive reaches the client. This matters significantly in regulated industries like healthcare and financial services. Blazor WASM requires an API layer between the browser and your data store, which enforces a clean separation and pairs well with disciplined API security practices for .NET applications. Neither model is inherently less secure, but Blazor Server's architecture makes the compliance conversation simpler. Let's talk about 6 real-world Blazor Development Services use cases. Here are 6 scenarios where organizations choose Blazor Development Services over JavaScript frameworks, with context on what makes each one work. 1. Healthcare patient portals. Blazor Server keeps protected health information on the server with no client-side exposure, which simplifies HIPAA compliance architecture reviews. A midsize patient portal covering appointment booking, lab results, and secure messaging typically takes 10 to 14 weeks with a 3-developer team. The server-side model also ensures screen readers interact with standard HTML rather than client-rendered virtual DOM, meeting accessibility requirements with significantly less custom code. 2. Banking and financial dashboards. Real-time account dashboards and trade monitoring tools benefit from SignalR push updates, which eliminate polling loops and reduce server load under high-frequency data change scenarios. Sensitive risk calculation logic stays server-side, reducing the attack surface and keeping PCI-DSS scope smaller. Several banking clients we work with have moved from aging Silverlight or WPF over Citrix setups directly to Blazor Server with minimal retraining, since the team's C# skills transfer without a language change. Now, how Blazor fits into .NET application modernization. .NET application modernization is rarely a big bang rewrite. Most organizations have too much embedded business logic, too many integration dependencies, and too little tolerance for downtime to shut a system down and rebuild it from scratch. Blazor fits into an incremental modernization approach that preserves existing investments rather than discarding them. Legacy .NET framework modernization uses the strangler fig pattern to incrementally replace components without a full rewrite. A reverse proxy routes specific pages or routes to a new Blazor application while the existing system handles everything else. Over 12 to 24 months, the Blazor application grows to cover the full feature set, and the old system is decommissioned without a single cutover event. This approach carries significantly lower deployment risk than maintaining a full parallel rebuild before anything goes live, and it lets the team ship working software to users throughout the migration rather than at the end. Webforms to Blazor migrations work because both use a component or control model with server-side rendering. MVC to Blazor is trickier. Razor views and controller actions don't map directly to Blazor's component tree. The practical path is to retain your existing ASP.NET Development Services layer and replace only the front end with Blazor components. This minimizes risk, keeps proven back-end code intact, and allows the migration to deliver incremental UI improvements rather than requiring a full switchover. Let's talk about next up, Blazor Development Services versus React. Which framework wins for enterprise? This debate is less about framework quality and more about team composition and organizational context. The honest answer is that both are production ready, and the wrong one for your team is whichever one your team doesn't know. React has a larger third-party component ecosystem, more hiring options, and better tooling for SEO-dependent public pages. If your team has experienced TypeScript developers and you're building a consumer product where page-level SEO matters on every route, React will reach production faster and with fewer friction points. Blazor Development Services win when your entire team are C# developers, when code sharing between client and server removes meaningful duplication, or when toolchain consistency within a Microsoft-first stack reduces infrastructure complexity. A .NET team that doesn't have to context switch between C# and TypeScript typically produces fewer integration bugs and onboards new .NET developers faster. Now, let's talk about how much do Blazor Development Services cost? Cost estimates without project context are nearly useless. The table below is based on teams working at $85 to $120 per hour blended rates, which is typical for a custom software development company running onshore or hybrid engagements. Four factors consistently push Blazor projects over initial estimates. Fixed-price contracts work when requirements are fully defined upfront and unlikely to change. For most Blazor migrations or greenfield enterprise builds, they are not. Time and materials with milestone-based budget caps gives you flexibility without open-ended exposure. Reputable .NET microservices consulting and Blazor firms typically offer a paid discovery phase before committing to a project estimate. If a firm skips discovery and quotes a fixed price on the first call, treat that as a signal worth investigating further. Let's talk about how to choose the right .NET development partner. Not every .NET development company has genuine production Blazor experience. The framework is mature enough for enterprise use, but many .NET shops have one developer who explored it on a side project without ever shipping a production system. Knowing how to tell the difference before signing saves months of pain. Q Services specializes in .NET modernization with human-in-the-loop governance for enterprise applications. Every significant technical decision, including hosting model selection, state management approach, and API boundary design, receives a documented rationale and client sign-off before implementation starts. We have found this reduces mid-project direction changes by roughly 60% compared to engagements where architecture happens entirely inside the delivery team. Our standard Blazor engagement includes a 2-week discovery phase with documented current state analysis, a component-level build plan with per-feature effort estimates, weekly delivery metrics shared with the client, and a 60-day post-launch support window. We also support .NET microservices consulting engagements where Blazor serves as the UI layer for a distributed .NET backend, and our delivery metrics are published rather than kept internal. Now, next up, conclusion. Blazor development services make the most practical sense when your team already knows .NET, when you're modernizing legacy webforms or WinForms applications, or when you need tight UI to backend integration without maintaining a separate JavaScript framework alongside a C# API. The hosting model choice matters, but it's rarely the hardest decision in a Blazor engagement. Getting the integration architecture, state management approach, and data migration plan right from the start shapes more of your outcomes than which rendering model you select. If you're evaluating a Blazor migration or a greenfield build, a scope discovery phase is the right first step. It costs a fraction of a mid-project pivot and answers the questions no blog post can answer for your specific context: which existing systems need to integrate, what your real user concurrency looks like, and whether your current team needs additional support to deliver on schedule. Reach out to Q Services to discuss a structured discovery for your Blazor or .NET application modernization project.